Hi guys, it's Ahsante, and today I'm here with Rowan.
Hello, I'm Rowan. I make videos about sexuality, gender, and pop culture.
And today we're going to talk about intersectionality. Making the intersectionality videos into a series at Rowan's suggestion, actually. So here we go.
My experience with intersectionality has kind of come through a feminist lens. So feminism is like the basis point, and then the addition of, okay, so if we're talking about equality of gender, we have to acknowledge there are other identities that come into play. So if we're talking about the wage gap, for example, we can't just assume that all women have the same wage gap as all men. Race is a huge part of that.
Right.
So I imagine that some people have come at it from different angles. So they've been in like the queer community, and then they've thought about, you know, the difference between gay men and gay women, and so gender has come in that way. But for me, it was kind of a basis understanding of feminism, and then adding on top of that life experiences of other women and how that feeds into it.
Now we're going to check our privilege. Educational privilege, check.
Yep.
White privilege,
Check.
male privilege,
No.
class privilege,
Yeah.
check.
I would say
Middle class,
yeah.
for me. Christian privilege, check for me.
No for me.
Able-bodied,
Yeah. Check.
heterosexual, check for me.
Not for me.
And cisgender, check. So yeah, those are our backgrounds. What is one conversation that you feel like could benefit from increased intersectionality?
Conversations around the queer community definitely could be. As someone who talks about representation a lot, the representation of queer people is very, very narrow and has been a compromise, I think, and a lot of the battles that the LGBT community have fought publicly have kind of been like, we can get away with asking for this thing because, for example, gay marriage, it was kind of, in the UK at least, we had civil partnerships before gay marriage because they thought we can't go full marriage, we need to do civil partnerships first. And so that was a fight that was fought, and it was kind of seen as like the be all and end all. But issues of like racism within the community, for example, issues of transphobia, were not given the same kind of highlighting. So for me, like those kind of conversations about what is important in the community and what people want to fight for could definitely benefit from more intersectionality.
Are you seeing any like budding conversations going in those directions?
I feel like it really ebbs and flows quite a bit. So particularly within the transgender element of the community, it's almost this really awful situation where we have a lot more acknowledgement and representation of trans people in the media, but we still have all the ignorance that comes with it, except for like before, when it might have been a small amount of people who kind of vaguely had transgender people in the periphery of their life. Now their ignorance is transplanted over onto, okay, now we're going to talk about Caitlyn Jenner, which I recently did a talk at my school, and like that was the kids' reference point for trans people was Caitlyn Jenner because they were interested in the Kardashians. And so trying to have a conversation where you have increased representation, but it's still not widespread enough for it not to be like, here is the one trans person that I can name, and this is what I think all trans people are. I definitely feel like those conversations are starting to appear, but at the same time, with increased feminism, we also have the idea cropping up of like trans women aren't women. And so, which was obviously, in my head, that was like an old feminist idea. That kind of ignorance has come back. So for me, it's rather than a straight line going forwards, it's kind of started to regress, and these conversations are having to be like rehabbed with like a new generation of people.
What are some identities that you've learned about in the past year? And do you have any specific resources where, you know, you've been able to learn more?
I feel like the thing that I've learned most about in the last year has been areas around disability. I think actually mainly this is from people that I know on YouTube who have brought this conversation to the forefront. So people like Ricky, people like Ali have been kind of championing this and continuing to talk about it and bringing it into the wider sphere. Having friends who have disabilities, who are quite open to talk about it and answer questions, talking about the things that someone can't do with the current accessibility versus not wanting to be like, disabled people can't do anything. Isn't it inspiring how they live their lives? How incredible. So it's been really useful to have people talk quite openly about, this is my disability, this is how it affects me, this is the way in which the world makes it slightly more difficult for me because it's assumed that people won't have this disability, and this is how you as an ally or as someone can actually help with this and do something to change it within your behaviour, or here's the thing that you should champion that's a bit wider scale.
What are some ways that intersectionality is played out in your experience?
Reproductive rights for women is a huge part of the feminist movement, but as a queer woman, it's been very interesting going to the doctors because you get asked things about being sexually active and you're not really sure what that means. You're like, okay, do you mean like, can I be pregnant? Because then no. but do you mean could I have an STI? In which case, that's more possible, but also like where, like active how, like what do you count as active? So the idea of like the construct of virginity and like anything to do with sex is such a different topic. You don't really have many like touchstones in media or in sort of like life experience or milestones that you go through as a queer person. You just have like coming out, that's like the one universal experience. But doing anything like going to the doctors, it's always like a weird guessing game. I've had doctors assume a lot of things for my sexuality, things about like what I do and don't want. I've had people, not the doctors but elsewhere, say like, oh, so you don't want to get married and you don't want to like wear a nice wedding dress and like have that day. People like assume that I don't want kids because of my sexuality. I've had people assume that my sexuality is because of like medical reasons and stuff like that. Like this, and that was a doctor. Like there's a lot of like
bizarre,
weird kind of assumptions that get made about like who you are as a person, which a lot of the time do intersect with who I am as a woman. So the idea of like, you won't want to do this thing that women do because you're queer.
Out of your sexuality.
Yeah, like you have long hair, you can't be queer, which is something that was said to me by like an 18-year-old like highly educated person. I am naturally quite a feminine person, but it's why I sort of enjoy it an extra amount, because I feel like for cis and straight women, for them kind of flirting with gender would be to be more masculine. And I feel like for me, flirting with gender stereotypes around queer women is to be more feminine. Like that is political in a way, which I think is not often appreciated. With the feminism of like kind of the 70s and 80s, there's a little bit more like masculinity was like the image of feminism, and that's what it should be. I feel like we're in a really interesting stage of that discussion where it's like, okay, we can have people who are feminine and queer and feminist, and all those things aren't like contradictions.
You can exist in different ways but still have that identity. There are different ways to be a queer woman.
And although I did say I was able-bodied, I have had like, and still do have mental health issues. So that's a really interesting one, crossing over with like queerness, with people assuming that like elements of your sexuality are because of that, or your mental health is because of your sexuality. That stuff happens quite a bit. The idea that there's something like broken in some way, because so much about attraction and romantic and sexual feelings is something that's quite like cerebral. So to have something wrong with you, something else different wrong that's cerebral, it's kind of like, oh, okay, cool, these two things must be something together. Must be something weird, which I feel like is a real throwback to like a way of thinking of like it being on the register for like mental illness and all this kind of stuff, which wasn't like too long ago, to be honest, a couple of decades. And also obviously being a woman and having mental health issues, that idea of like you're making it up or it isn't real, or you're a hysterical woman, or you know, it's just like how women are. Also having like endometriosis and that kind of like chronic pain element is very similar as well, because it is something that's so specific to women. I have a lot of things wrong with me that are like specific to women, and like the lack of research that's been done about them, the lack of understanding is just ridiculous.
There's not the same resources put into women's health issues.
Not at all. Not at all. Like I've had like a real problem trying to find out stuff that's wrong, but then I've talked to friends of mine, and a lot of them have been like, oh, I have the exact same thing as you, and I've just been like really confused about it, or I know someone who's had this operation who had the same thing as you, but that information like seems to weirdly be going around like woman to
individually,
woman, like,
as opposed
to having
the information there
at
so
the doctors to
kind
of do it. So it's been a strange intersection in that way of like things coming in and out of my life, where I've been like, oh, so this was particularly annoying or irritating or difficult to deal with because of this other identity that people have assumptions about, and those assumptions sort of build into an opinion that people form.
That's a good demonstration of how everything is interlocking. It's important to not just take things individually, but take things as intersections. So intersectionality.
Great segue.
Well, thank you so much, Rowan.
Thank you for having me.
Talking with me. Make sure to go check out Rowan's channel and check out the video that we're about to do over there. As always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to live spiritedly and think creatively, and I will see you next time. Bye. Boom.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Like a pro. As long as you press record, it's all fine.